Hi, Jake Williams from Edition InfoSec here. I wanted to chat a little bit about there's a story rotating around about a vigilante who is going around and patching Mikrotik routers. And what he's doing, Mikrotik, however you pronounce that, right? The Mikrotik routers. And what we're hearing about this apparently is this gentleman, I say gentleman, it could be lady, who knows, this actor is going around and basically logging into these things, effectively exploiting them, right? Bypassing security controls and then, then going in and patching them to make the remote administration ports unaccessible from the internet. He's actually, he, she, it, whatever, they're leaving a contact email in the configuration to say, hey, turn this off. Want to let you know I turned it off, kind of thing. Well, it's kind of an interesting play there, right? Because what we're looking at now is effectively that, well, I mean, really, you've got somebody that's hacking, criminally hacking, and changing settings. Now, we had a lot of people talk about this with Eternal Blue, right? The router thing might be a bigger issue, might be a smaller issue. It depends on who you talk to, really, to get those opinions out there. But again, as we look at these routers, they obviously are vulnerable, right? And around Eternal Blue timeframe, we had some folks coming around saying, hey, if we just turned a worm loose on the internet, kind of like WannaCry, right, or NotPetya. In fact, some people noted around the NotPetya time that had somebody written a worm and deployed a worm around the WannaCry event, that maybe those machines would be patched. Basically, going to worm a non-malicious worm designed to go in and basically change the settings and update the patches for MS1710 there specifically. In the case of the Mikrotiks, they're not upgrading anything. The routers remain vulnerable to attack. They're just not vulnerable to attack from the open internet, right? So probably a useful differentiation there. That said, how very interesting, right? And I'm interested to know in the comments, what you think about Vigilante patching these routers. My personal opinion on this is that, crime is a crime, right? I understand the intent is purely to patch these and prevent them from being used in other criminal activity, which again, there's no question, left in unpatched state, they certainly will. I think it's also pretty easy to make the argument that absent a vigilante doing this, nobody else is going to patch these routers, right? The whole Mikrotik remote port, remote administration, open from the internet thing, it's been known for a long time, right? This isn't a brand new thing, right? So the whole like, hey, don't turn this on, definitely been known about. That said, some people actually use this for, yeah, that's right, administration, right? So it's kind of interesting to see how, the remote administration port is there for administration purposes. That said, of course, if the attacker can compromise it, so can, or the vigilante can, so can any other attacker for that matter. So again, I kind of step back and I have to say, regardless of intent, I would say in this case, at least my opinion is a crime, and it shouldn't be, the attacker shouldn't be doing this. The overwhelming majority of I believe the attacker was interviewed by the press, and he said he had around 50, 50 people that emailed based on the email he puts in the comments of the configuration file for the Mikrotik as it's being basically as he's closing that port. Well, he said the overwhelming majority of the people who sent those basically sent emails there said, hey, they don't like this, right? Don't do this. Stop messing with my router. Now, I think that some people are probably annoyed purely because, well, it's an intrusion, right? I mean, it feels intrusive, right? So I kind of have to step back then and say, okay, well, what if I were one of these people, right? What would I be thinking, right? And I have to say, first off, I'd be embarrassed that my stuff wasn't patched, but I would feel like somebody had violated my personal space, right? And I think that's pretty common, right? We see this a lot in red team outbriefs, right? When we talk to folks about, talk about the red team exercise that we performed and said, hey, here's what we got, here's the data we stole, here's what we have access to. People are like, and I'll tell you, two of the things that really bothered people the most: access to video cameras and voice over IP. And as soon as we demonstrate, we're like, hey, look, I can hot mic the phone in this office, right? And they're like, they always lose it a little bit, right? Now, I don't think that's because they believe hot mic in the phone is the biggest deal. It's like the creepiest, right? We start getting, as you look at intellectual property, me stealing an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of your, critical, maybe some of your margins, maybe a profit and loss sheet or whatever, could be much, much more damaging to from a competitor standpoint than them hot miking your conference room for a few minutes or a few hours or whatever. Now, look, I understand the vulnerability lasts into perpetuity, but somebody actually has to listen to that data to make sense of it. And anyway, look, bottom line, here's what I'll say, right? That whole piece where people get basically we compromise the webcam, or sorry, the video cameras, sometimes PTCs, sometimes IP surveillance cameras, and voice over IP tends to give people the biggest icky factor. Well, if you're a network admin, you're the one seeing the comment here, right? In the config, your regular user isn't seeing this. It's only going to be a network admin. And again, how are they seeing these comments in the first place? Well, my suspicion is that some of them actually tried to do remote support and couldn't. Right, that's obviously a problem there, right? And so I think your network admins, that this is their baby, right? This is their conference room, as it were, and so I feel like in that case they probably are reacting largely to that feeling of being trespassed against. Separately, I have to say that I think there's probably a piece here as well, where we have to say that they may have legitimate reason to be mad, right? That the some odd number of people that have contacted the email, and by the way, there's an unknown number of people who have noticed that this has been done without them actively contacting that email. They may have reported the incident to, and in many cases, I can actually say I know for sure have contacted law enforcement. So as we look at these vigilante actions, very, very interesting here, and I have to dissuade anybody from ever attempting something like this. Look, the reality is you don't know all the configuration of the system. And if you look at network outages and network admins, it's not hard to come to the conclusion that a lot of our networks today are held together with bubble tape and chewing gum. Right? I said bubble tape and chewing gum. Let's see, chewing gum and Scotch tape. That's what I meant. Totally. A lot of our networks are held together with that, right? And the configs, I don't want to say happen by accident, but oh wow, a lot of those happen by accident, right? Basically, they try it until something works, and they're like, we don't touch it. Right, and so when somebody, an attacker, whoever it is, gets in there and starts messing with stuff, you can say, well, it's just a simple configuration change. But I've seen simple configuration changes take down a number of different networks over the years, and those were the people who at least had an idea of what the network config looked like before. I don't think that this attacker does. I think the attacker is simply saying, hey, if I can exploit it, so can somebody else, and so I'm going to turn off the ability for me to exploit this myself. Assuming then that because I've turned that off, no one else will be able to exploit it then either. Well, I think that's probably a bad plan overall, right? Again, beyond the whole criminal trespass thing, Computer Fraud and Abuse Act violation, et cetera, et cetera. Again, you really are putting yourself in the position where you're like, I know your network better than you do. I'm going to go patch your stuff, even if you call it for the good of the internet. And I have to air quote that good of the internet, right? I mean, I don't even know what that means. I get the idea. We want to prevent these botnets, right, from taking over these Mikrotiks or cryptojackers from taking these over. I totally get that, but at the same time, I got to step back and say, hey, I just don't think this is a good idea. So if you in the future are pondering this, think about first off, we're seeing unprecedented numbers of people being brought to justice for hacking. Right, there's just no two ways about it. We're seeing a much higher prosecution rate, at least, or even identification rate. Let's take prosecution out. Suppose for you live in a non-extradition country where you're unlikely to be extradited back to whatever country you would worry about, prosecuting. Let's go with just the U.S. here for a minute, but whatever. You live in a non-extradition country, you're not worried about this. We'll still, you should be worried about the potential that you take a network down, and I think that's probably my big one there, because that takes all of your goodwill, right, that you're trying to embolden by making the internet a safer place, and you start dropping networks offline. And again, you look at a router, that's really what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about whole networks dropping off. Could be a SOHO, could be a branch office or whatever. So I have to come back then and say that this just isn't smart, right? And ethically, I think there's some interesting ethical questions, right? Some people might argue that taking one network down is no big deal if it saves the internet, right? But one doesn't logically follow the other, right? So I kind of have to step back then and say that those remote admin ports may have been enabled for a reason. Yes, absolutely. Our admins, network admins, should be patching their devices. Router OS, like many operating systems is not necessarily a free upgrade. They may have to pay to do that. In many cases, we'll have to pay to do that, depending on their version of router board and Mikrotik. And so this creates an interesting dynamic because you may have a network admin who has made a conscious decision, and I'd be interested to know in comments some of your thoughts on this. What's the ethical discussion look like around a admin has made a conscious decision not to patch the router, knowing that they can't afford the upgrades or hardware incompatibility and they need a hardware upgrade or whatever, but still require remote admin. They may have made a calculated decision and said, listen, we know we're going to get popped, right? We're okay with that. Availability comes first. We all know in InfoSec, we are looking at the intersection between CI&A, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And it may be that availability is the number one concern here. And if so, the attacker, possibly, right, as opposed to confidentiality and integrity, the attacker may actually be impacting the availability. Now, of course, any other attacker could. That argument can be made there too. I'm interested to know what your ethical thoughts are, or at least your thoughts are on the ethical question of, is this acceptable when put in that light? All right. So anyway, I think that's where I want to cut it off here. I just wanted to talk about the whole vigilante thing because we're hearing a lot more about this as people are thinking more, and we're getting more corporate customers asking us at Rendition about hacking back, right? Oftentimes they'll ask us, well, we do it for them, and the answer there is obviously no. We're not getting involved in that, right? But then it comes back to the okay, well then can you help us learn how to do it? Well, yeah, but look, realistically, and I'm stealing this from Robert M. Lee, if you suck at defense, you probably suck at offense too, right? Meh. Anyways, we get more hacking back going here. I expect to see more normalization of cyber. I hate to say cyber warfare, right? But whatever you want to call it, there, network exploitation, and so I think over time we're going to see more people doing things like this. And so these are important ethical questions to at least decide, where do we stand on this stuff, right? I'll tell you that it's unlikely to be long before your organization asks you something along those lines, right? Is it going to be acceptable for us to do this hacking back operation or not, right? My thought there is or not, but maybe you have a different opinion. If so, certainly, again, tag that in the comments there, either on LinkedIn, Twitter, or right here on YouTube. Anyway, thanks for your time. Jake Williams from Rendition InfoSec, signing off.